Mario is an extremely one-dimensional series, and I mean that as a compliment. Let's talk about the Mario series and the Nintendo design philosophy, because Nintendo is very good at making games. Sure, they're terrible at PR, their hardware's a bit hit and miss, their software's usually subpar, and their netcode is... yeah. But their games are incredible, and Nintendo has very famously gone on record to talk about how they make their games with a different philosophy than a lot of other devs. In an interview, Shigeru Miyamoto was talking about how Nintendo developed Super Mario 64, and he said this: "That's how we make games at Nintendo. We get the fundamentals solid first, then we do as much with that core concept as our time and ambition will allow." It was being able to move Mario and Luigi around with the 3D control stick, and being able to change the camera view with the press of a button. We wanted to make a game where just moving Mario around was fun. This is the way Nintendo develops most of their games. They have a textureless environment with textureless characters in it, and they just think about what their core mechanics will be. And they sit in this textureless land for as long as it takes them to make it feel really good. Once they've got that down, that's when they start designing everything else. This is basically how every Nintendo game works. Take Mario Odyssey, for example. The core mechanic is the hat. You throw the hat, and everything stems from this hat throw. It breaks blocks, it collects moons, it opens doors, it possesses other creatures, you use it for platforming. It is the core basis of every single interaction in the entire game. Nintendo created a mechanic where Mario would throw his hat, and they used this hat throw mechanic to inform all of the other design decisions in the entire game. Nintendo also likes to do this thing where they turn the game's core mechanic into a character itself. Like Cappy, who is literally a living hat. He's your companion in this game not because Nintendo thought Mario needed a cool on-screen friend, but because he constantly personifies every single hat-based interaction that the game has to show you. And hat-based interactions are, well, all of the interactions in the whole game. Flood in Mario Sunshine is the exact same thing. The water pack is this game's core mechanic, so why not make it a character with speaking lines? And this bottom-up design philosophy isn't unique to Mario either. Luigi's Mansion is not a game about hunting ghosts and saving Mario in a haunted mansion. It's a game about a vacuum cleaner. Arms is a fighting game all about the arms. Splatoon is all about your paint gun. This design philosophy is integral to why Nintendo makes such incredible games, because the core mechanic that the game is built around is often extremely simple. You just throw your hat, or you just shoot water, or whatever. But it can interact with dozens of different entities in the game, which means that the game can have a ton of complexity in all of its interactions, but all of that complexity comes from a simple, easy to understand mechanic. If you come across some new, unique interaction in another game, you might have no idea what to do. But if you come across something new in Mario Odyssey, chances are you just throw your hat at it, which is great for a new player's learning experience. My favourite example of this sort of thing by a long shot that Nintendo has ever made is the original Super Mario Bros. For the NES. Just like how the core mechanic of Odyssey is throwing your hat, the core mechanic of Super Mario Bros. Is jumping. In the modern day, we really take a lot of what this game pioneered for granted, but this game was the first game to introduce most of its mechanics. Nintendo wanted a game that was all about jumping, so they designed all of the game's mechanics and interactions around this fact. You jump into blocks to break them, or to free power-ups from them. You then have to jump up to reach the power-up that you just released by jumping. You defeat enemies by jumping on their head. You can't even finish a level without jumping over this block to reach the flagpole. It's impossible to even reach the finish line without jumping. In modern platformers, both 2D and 3D, we take a lot of this sort of thing for granted because it just seems so obvious. Of course jumping on an enemy kills the enemy, because it's a 2D platformer. But Mario pioneered most of these things. These weren't industry staples until Mario did it. Most other 2D side-scrollers of the era were much more combat-oriented. Sure, it was a side-scroller where you could jump, but the main interaction of the game was the guns and the boss fights and the combat. But not Mario. Mario was the original, first ever OG platformer. It truly is just a game about jumping, just like most of the platformers that came after it were. So yes, Mario is a very one-dimensional game, but it's one-dimensional in the best possible way. The game is built from the ground up on a single fun gameplay idea. Everything from the enemy design to the way the character interacts with the world is all informed by one very simple mechanic. And when the devs at Nintendo come up with a cool new mechanic, that's usually when a new sequel emerges. Some devs are quite content to take an old game, slightly tweak it, give it a new coat of paint and churn it out once a year for the next 2 decades, but Nintendo aren't quite that type of developer, which is why most new Nintendo games have some totally new and fresh mechanic to play with. And it's also why there will never be a sequel to F-Zero. If Nintendo doesn't come up with an awesome new idea to go with such a racing game, it will never be released. So if Nintendo does decide to make Super Mario Odyssey 2 one day, don't expect it to be a hack game just like the first one was. Thanks for watching.